Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski. Today on the podcast, we're back with George Germann, and we're going to talk about things that happened at the end of his racing career and the rest of his life and his thoughts over that whole journey. Good morning, George.
Good morning, Matt.
In part one, we covered pretty extensively your running career from the origin through your final racing days. I'm interested to find out how you transitioned out and how that affected your identity and your thoughts. You described how you were well aware of the nature of the sport during the 60s, an amateur sport, a limited lifetime of opportunity for you that you had to get it done in your early 20s if you were going to break through. But how did your identity change, if you can reflect on that, from high school through the very end of your racing days?
It's a very interesting question. I came onto the track and field scene very late in my high school years. So I only really had my senior year to compete. And thanks God, I did extraordinarily well. I got a scholarship to Seton Hall University, and that sort of set me on the road for the rest of my career because this is where I got my education. But not only my education, my coach was a man of principle, John Gibson. He was a world record holder of the 400 meters, was well renowned in the coaching circles, but he was a very moral person, a very good person. He taught us not only to do well on the track, but to do well in life. He put our career in academics before athletics. And he made that very clear. We're there to get an education first, and we were there second because we were on scholarship to compete well and compete in the programs of the university. And after that, whatever's left over. So that sort of set the tone, if you will. I wanted to obviously achieve a bachelor's degree, and I wanted to do well on that score. But I also wanted to do well on the athletic field. And we came in with 10 other freshmen. We were very hungry, meaning that we really wanted to do well, and we did. So in my 4 years at Seton Hall University, I won, see if I get 3 All-American titles, 3 national championships, 11 times All-Eastern. All-Eastern was determined if you competed in the IC4A championships and you finished in the top 3 or 4, you were All-Eastern. I did well. And then I hit the international scene. It was at that level, you realize you've got to think differently. You're now competing at a completely different platform. Everybody in the world who gets up in the top echelon knows what it takes to get there. I would say it's probably 90% mental at that point. Everyone athletically is at the same step. So it really comes down to who wants it the most. That's where you need to train your mind as well as your body. And on that score, when you are completely focused on what you need to do, what you must do, it's much easier. If you're competing both nationally or internationally and you become unfocused, then you have problems. If you don't want to have the desire to win, if you're not hungry enough, you're not going to win.
How does that affect the stress, worry before a race? If you are focused, were you relaxed?
When I was the most confident in my ability, I ran the best. When I was sort of unsure of myself, gee, am I really in shape enough? I really didn't train hard enough. Then it disturbs or destroys your confidence. It's like if you're on the ski slopes and you don't have confidence. Speed is good on the ski slopes. So when you have a bad fall, or you'll tend to lose your confidence. So I would say being confident in your ability is extremely important. In my later days of running, I had gotten married, I had a son, and immediately my focus changed. Now I have a little baby and my wife to take care of. So you cannot really put your athletics first. You got to share it if you can. In an amateur sport, like I was competing in, it wasn't like you have a revenue coming in and somebody is sponsoring you and paying for your mortgages. In the amateur world in those days, you were not being paid. You could not be paid. And of course, we've heard about money being slipped under the table. Yeah, maybe 100 here, 100 there, but it wasn't enough to sustain a living. So unless you are in an environment, an education environment, which I'll come back to because I was, or in the military and special services or other programs, it was very difficult to continue to compete after college. And in my case, I got married in 1968. My son was born in 1969. And immediately, you can't be selfish. Your focus has to change. So that affects you, even though I tried to continue to compete and did reasonably well. The other problem I had is that in this country in those days, sports really didn't have a special place. The government wanted us to beat the Soviets and the commies in the dual meets, and they wanted us to do well in the Olympics, but they didn't really provide any programs or funding. So everyone who was competing as an amateur in the United States had to do it on their own. If you were lucky enough to get a company that would allow you time off to train. So most companies don't want to hear, all right, I've got to leave at 3 o'clock every day to go and train. They don't want to hear about that. Maybe a few might allow you to do that for their own marketing purposes, but very few companies at the time did. So as you get into having to mix and balance your family life, your employee life, to remain completely focused on track and field or competing on an international level is not possible, or if it is possible, it's very selfish. So I had to transition from thinking of only myself in this equation, but of many other things, as I said before, balancing family and employment, etc.
Yeah. On the one point you raised there on the amateur nature of the support in the U.S., let's take the example of Bill Toomey, world record holder. This is someone who did it as an amateur, and certainly parts of the world, there were full-time athletes he was competing against everywhere else. So do you think that affected performances, or were people who were dedicating their lives, they were just as good, they just didn't have the support that some of these that made de facto professional athletes out of theirs?
In some cases, in Bill Toomey's case, he had just basically started his international career. We became very, very good friends in 1965. He won the World University Games, the University, he won the decathlon. And then he went on, of course, to set the world record and win the Olympics in 1968. In that particular sport, not only is it a very tough sport, there's so much competition. So everybody's always on your heels. In Bill's case, he did the best you could expect anyone. He won not only the Olympics, but he also set the world's record.
Right.
So he got to the point where he could not continue at the level he was. Same reasons. He probably had more funding and sponsorship than I did, and that's good. But even with favorable sponsorship and funding, just physically, track and field is a very, very short period in your life.
Right.
To be able to compete at a national, international level, at best, maybe 7 or 8 years. I think some of the weight men, Al Order, for example, and a few others, can go on much longer. But a runner, particularly in the middle distances and sprinters, it's a short life. Longer distance, you can probably extend it. I didn't want to move up to certainly not a marathon, but I had no desire to move up to the 5K or 10K. So you reach a point in your life, you got to say, I've done well, I've done as best as I can, and I've got to think of retiring. I've seen so many people hang on, and it's disappointing. You'd like to go out on top. When I got to the point where I said, I can't really do this anymore, I said, I'd rather be remembered for doing well than hanging on, losing races, and saying, why is that guy still competing?
You're too healthy, George. Mentally, it's good example of that values or self-reflection base that you did as a young man. That's not always so common, that we think that people at that age have a chance to know themselves very well. What were the steps of your retirement? Was it a formal decision or announcement on your part?
Not really. I had hoped after 1965 doing so well, and my goal was to try and make the 1968 Olympics. And at the same time, there was a little thing going on called the Vietnamese War.
Yeah.
And in 1968, I tried to get deferments, but they wouldn't hear of it. So I had an induction notice at the same time that the Olympic trials were being held.
Wow.
So, and that induction notice may have come in May or something. I tried to appeal it, but the Selective Service Board didn't want to hear it. So all of a sudden, my focus is destroyed.
Yeah.
And now I'm saying they don't want to hear it. They being the Secret Service, they want me to come and serve. And I did. The sad part is at the same time this was going on, I was teaching at Seton Hall University. And I did have a schedule where I could train in the afternoon because I had an early morning teaching schedule. So that was working out really well. So that phase of it was good. I did not expect at the time that I got induction notices to Uncle Sam needs you, boy. And that's no problem. I would have conserved. It wasn't an anti-war protest. I just wanted to compete in the Olympics.
Yeah.
So when I got that notice, that was it. My confidence so much as my spirit was blown.
Right.
And at the same time, I was teaching computer science. And I was the only professor they had at the time. They were just starting up a program. And the university appealed on my behalf. So I report to the induction notice with bag in hand. All right, I'm going in, my duty. And they defer me on the spot. I looked up and said, my name is George. Oh, you're George Germann? Oh, you've been deferred.
Wow.
So what could I say? At that time, it was just too late,
Wow.
So going into 1969, I was still competing, but my spirit had been blown. I had a young baby. And the university offered me a position as an assistant coach. And I said, all right, that's a good segue. I'd still be involved in track and field. I was also an assistant professor, and I had time to do it. So I accepted the assistant coach position. Now, in those days, if you were coaching and you were being paid for it, now I'm being paid like $2,500 a semester or something like that.
Yeah.
You could not, your eligibility, if you're taking money as a coach and about having $10, you're not eligible.
Right.
Amateur rules at that time were very strict, more than they had to be. And it went on much longer in this country than it needed to. Avery Brundage was the strict disciplinarian. The AAU controlled the selection of amateurs to the Olympics, internationals. So they had a good thing going. And the athletes were not always in their best interest, if you will.
It's interesting to get that perspective. Certainly, there's controversy with FIFA and the World Football Association now, and there's politics. And Avery Brundage has a long history going back into the 40s with his views and world influence and decisions. Reading between the lines of your first interview, the AAU, you were not a fan of the AAU as having the highest standards and mission.
I wouldn't go that far. Let me try and put it in balance. My problem was with both the NCAA and the AAU. They made the Teamsters look like a bunch of doves. They fought over sanctions, who would be in charge. The AAU would not give any leeway. The NCAA said, they're making a lot of money and we want a piece of that action. The NCAA started like 1962, threatening to take kids' scholarships away if they competed in the national championships. It was a bluff, but in 63, they did it again, and that was personal because I was competing in '63
Wow.
on Seton Hall University. They had threatened not to allow us to compete in the national championships. Now, again, they backed off. I did go on to win the national championships in the 2-mile relay. John F. Kennedy, or actually Robert F. Kennedy, tried to negotiate the dispute between these two warring factions. And he managed to get them to back off, I think, in '62, so the teams could compete overseas. Then that was short-lived. Then in 1963 or '64, JFK appointed Douglas MacArthur to mediate between these two. So they agreed to have a moratorium for the 1964 Olympics, but in '65, it started all over again. And that was the year that I competed in the outdoor championship. The indoor championships, they threatened. I wrote a letter to President Johnson, and one of his people actually responded, I have a letter somewhere, basically saying they're in mediation. We hope that things will go well.
Right.
On the outdoor meet, they didn't back off. They actually denied athletes from competing in the national championships. Yeah,
Wow.
the problem is the mediators, there was no punishment they could levy on these two groups. You can't put them in the jail. They're not breaking any laws. The AAU's attitude is they had no responsibility to the public, to the athletes, to the nation. It was their highway. If you didn't like it, go away.
Wow.
So it was I guess animosity, if it's coming through, is both of them. The first and foremost should be the welfare of the athletes. Secondly, it should be that the United States does as best as it possibly can, because on the world scene, it's not just about two teams competing or a bunch of people running around in their underwear in circles. It's about your national integrity and superiority. It was a big deal. It was during the Cold War. So these groups of old men only thought of themselves, and they were selfish. Now, the AAU has done a lot of good, too, and so has the NCAA. But on this score, couldn't they have acted like the adults in the room?
Right. Yeah, it's fascinating history. Let me ask you about then how you, as a coach, developed your philosophy and advocating for your athletes, and what kind of relationship did you form in this official different relationship with athletes rather than a teammate? How did that change?
Significantly, I would say. Number one, now I was the assistant coach, so John Gibson was still the head coach. I asked him if I could train the freshmen, so I had some group I could mold.
Yeah.
Now, my values and John Gibson's values were pretty much the same in terms of you're here to get an education and you're here to compete and so forth. I would say that some of our coaching strategies were different. It was not a conversation I could easily have with my head coach. I'll give you one example. He was a 400-meter hurdler. He had held the world record. So between the indoor and outdoor season, we would do these exercises, bounds, leaping bounds, and stretching. Now, we hadn't been doing them before. And after doing them for a week straight, we were all crippled. We literally were in the best possible shape. We covered off the indoor season. And in 2 weeks of this, we're crippled. We're limping. We could hardly walk. And then a week later, we're competing in the Iona Queens relay, the Penn relays a week after that. And so from my experience, we're spending the next 3 weeks trying to get back in shape.
Recovery.
The exercises were good if you were doing them all along. So being a hurdler, this was natural to him. So I couldn't convince them that it was the wrong thing to do. And but nevertheless, we remained friends to the day he died. He lived to 104. To answer your other part of the question, and if I'm talking too much, tell me, quiet.
Not at all.
I molded the freshmen. We had great relationships, and there was a coach-athlete relationship. Even though I was younger, I was, let's see, in '69, when I was 22, and then 5 years, 6 years. Yeah, so I'm in my late 20s. And these kids are in their early 20s or late teens. But they respected me, and we got along quite well. They listened to what I told them to do. The other good thing I was able to do I was still in very, very good shape. So I'd
Right.
go out and run with them and observe them, like in cross country. I'd run the trail with them. I could see with some of them what they're doing wrong. I said, now you're going up a hill. You need to lift your knees more. And on downhill, I would say, don't be afraid of the hill, let gravity. So I could give them techniques
Mm-hmm.
from my own experiences right on the trail. And that worked out really well. And they respected the fact that I could do it.
How did things change at Seton Hall then in a decade and ongoing in your coaching? What changed? The training table in the cafeteria and facilities and anything else? Did you see changes?
Not really. The one thing we did manage to get done at Seton Hall is we were training for indoors. We ran on a wooden board track, which was 11 laps to a mile. That board track was outside. So that when it was winter in February and it was 16 degrees and snowing, we were given snow shovels. And then we worked out on the wooden track outside.
Was that banked like a normal indoor
Yes.
11-lap track?
It was bank track. So you really had to know how to run the boards because you didn't want to go off an icy board track into the field. We had to wear the little spikes, especially if it was icy. So we learned to run indoors on the wooden track because that's where we trained. So as assistant coach, we managed to convince my head coach and myself that we could put a bubble up. So we enclosed the track in an air bubble. And so now we're competing in an environment that's warm, well, lukewarm. And that made a big difference because we had to strip down, run, put the sweats back on and jog and then do it again.
Wow.
So that didn't really change the training techniques. It's just that we trained in a little warmer environment.
I was going to ask you about recruiting. Did you participate in any of the recruiting?
I did. That was one of my responsibilities to do the recruiting. We pretty much recruited locally, and in metropolitan area of New York, it was very rich talent. A lot of Catholic high schools had good track teams, New Jersey as well. So yeah, I did recruit. It was not my favorite. Recruiting is tough because every parent expects their kid is the best. It's a lot of negotiation. It's a lot different now, rules and regulations. Even then, recruiting was necessary, but it took me off the field.
Right.
Yeah.
A big transition in running happened a little bit later in the U.S. with the success of Frank Shorter in 1972 and the publication of James Fix's book brought running as a hobby for the public to the public psyche.
Mm-hmm.
But you were through a incredibly important decade in U.S. history, the Vietnam War time frame, protests, changing social cultures, and at this time you start a family. So there's a lot going on that you had to manage. How did Seton Hall and you change because of the times over those couple decades?
Well, trying to get my thoughts together. In late 60s, several of the track athletes went down and protested the Vietnamese War.
Wow.
In front of the bishop's house. I was not the assistant coach at the time. So John Gibson said that they are not here to protest. The students that they're on scholarship, they have to represent the university.
Mm-hmm.
Several of the administration in the university did not support John Gibson because they thought that he was overstepping his bounds. So it was a difficult time because you didn't know. I thought John Gibson was correct. And I was not assistant coach. I thought you're on scholarship, you have a responsibility first to represent the university in a good light, not to be out on the street protesting. But not every one of the administrators felt that way. I think it's worse today. We won't go into that. So They felt that at that time, John Gibson needed an assistant coach. They did anyway. He was overworked just on the track side, but so they wanted to relieve some burden on him. They asked me, and I was aware of what was going on. So John needs somebody he can talk to, mellow him out, because sometimes he was a disciplinarian, and sometimes he didn't think twice and count to 10. The other thing that was going on, I was a math major, but I got into computer science very early on. I realized that this is a career. There can be some good money to be made in this particular area. So I was also reaching out in my own mind. All right, so for the rest of my life, where am I going? Where am I going to be able to go and support my family in track and field? Nowhere's really.
Right.
But in being in the area of computer science, the world was my oyster. So I pretty much made the decision in about 1972 that my career needed to be in management, computers, computer science. Now, I had started the computer science program, academic program at Seton Hall. I was also running their operations, the data center. And when I got an opportunity to join a company outside of the university academic environment, I jumped at it. So I left the university after 13 years and became an IT executive, chief information officer of a number of companies. And I never would have been able to support my family if I had stayed in the academic environment. So it was a good decision. And
Right.
I had to put track and field behind me in a sense. Now, it didn't mean we did not visit the Melrose games for 40 years or the Penn Relays as spectators.
Mhm.
So I transitioned pretty easily, no regrets. Matt, the one thing you recognize as you get older, hopefully you recognize, there's a point in your life you can no longer be an athlete. You can be athletic, but you can't be an athlete. You know what I mean?
Sure. There's some parallels that I have with you that makes it easier to relate to this, which is just fascinating and great to hear. I realized I wasn't going to be the world's greatest mathematician, which ended my world and led to me transitioning into computer science, which led me to living and working and traveling to dozens and dozens of countries, and very good decision for me also. Let's talk about that. You had a vision and understanding of amateur athletics in the US in the 60s. What about the field of computers and math? How breaking and that realization to you of the potential, how did that come?
I guess we're both wayward mathematicians. As I said in my previous interview, I came in as a math major with 150 others, and it was one of 10 that graduated. Seton Hall University's math department at the time was highly theoretical. And it wasn't my cup of tea. I liked the practicality. I liked the application of mathematics. So when one of my professors offered a course in computer science, it was really programming on an IBM 1620, I jumped at it and I loved it. All of a sudden, wow, this is something that really makes sense. And I could then write programs embodying the mathematic formulas into the computer and understand it much even better. So I adopted to this new subject matter, if you will. Computers were indeed in their infancy. And in that area, I did a lot of innovative things. I won't go into all the technical stuff, but we did things that had never been done before using computers. My only regret is I didn't beat Bill Gates to writing the operating system for the PC. I actually did write an operating system and probably did it before Bill Gates, but I wasn't on IBM's radar screen. If I know what I was doing then, I said, geez, I could have wrote that operating system. I was involved in the infancy. I worked my way up into the management, and then I got into an executive management. So I was the chief information officer for General Mills apparel division. They used to have the alligator shirts and the alligator socks and so forth. And then I left them and went to Ernst & Young. I started off Young. They merged with Ernst & when he became Ernst & Young. And then I went to Chase as chief information officer. I was able to transfer my skills in computers into the business world, made a lot of money.
How did the idea of being a competitor and a teammate, a relay teammate, a athletic team teammate translate or inform your management
Yeah,
style or way you handled colleagues and subordinates? Was there an
I
impact?
yeah, oh yeah, I think the experience I had on the athletic field, the discipline, the planning, the vision, and the other fact, I was a teacher. I taught computer science at Seton Hall University for 13, 15 years. So when I got into the business world, I always felt it was my responsibility as a manager, as an executive leader, to also advance my employees, to teach them. I wanted them to learn from me. So I shared my experiences. And that came from being captain of the track team. So I was respected and people listened. So I transferred those skills, I guess, somewhat naturally. It came natural because I've always had the desire to help people, to teach them so they can learn. There are people who say, I don't want to teach them, they'll know as much as I do. So
Mhm.
I've never had that. I figure that the more they know, the better off they'll be, and I can relax. So it was sort of a natural transition. Those values I learned on the athletic field stayed with me my entire life. The discipline to see something through, the ability to plan, to set vision and goals, that doesn't go away when you leave the track.
Yeah. What about the drive for competitiveness? Was there room for that in the business world with you?
Oh, it had to be. Yeah. Yeah. Because competition exists everywhere. You know it. I would say competition exists in the business world and is not as nice as it is on the athletic field. I guess one of the things I had to learn is become a little bit more vicious because you can't always believe that everyone's a nice person. And you hate to find out the hard way. And usually I would give people the benefit of the doubt. But if you cross me once, you're not going to do it twice. I guess what I learned, maybe for the first time the hard way, it's an ugly world out there, and you got to be defensive as well as forgive. But just don't forget.
Being able to participate in the bubble of amateur athletics, even though you crossed into international political athletics, it is insulating and it does allow people that can have self identity strong enough to me, the way I hear it from you and the way I perceive it is it was an opportunity to take risks
Hmm.
but feel safe about it. And failure, pursuing goals and having failure or not 100% success the whole as you go along was safer then.
What I found, one of my first professors who hired me, Dr. Richard Gabriel, he was an inspiration as well. His philosophy was, I'd rather have you take a risk and fail than to do nothing, because most of the time you'll succeed. And so I've had that philosophy because when you're competing, you take risks. So in the business world, if you want to be innovative, there's a risk associated with it. Now, I've always felt that you could analyze the consequences of your decision so that 99% of the things that could go wrong or will go wrong, you can predict. And if you're good at it and you're risk adverse to a certain extent, but also mitigate what could go wrong, then you're typically successful. But at the end of the day, you have to take a risk. The one thing that I learned on the athletic field, even in a highly charged environment like the Soviet Union, the politics are outside the arena of the track. You compete individually against athletes. After the event is over, we have very good relationships with the Soviet athletes. We were good friends. So we were able to compartmentalize the politics at the Brezhnev level, who was the president at the time, was Johnson, from your relationship with the athletes. And in the business world, you don't, and you can't.
Right.
And the same people that'll stick a knife in your back are right in the same building, or the same department, the department over. So you had to think a little differently when you get to the business world. Now, the competitive spirit helped me along. They said, all right, I can compete with the most, with anyone.
Yeah.
But you can't always be Mr. Nice Guy, I found, even though that tends to be my go-to place to try to be nice.
You're very sincere and genuine, George. The path of your athletic success, which is very admirable to anybody who's been an athlete, can relate to what you had to go through to get to this great success. The opportunity, the timing of your entry into computer field is fascinating. And again, we can't help where we're born or when we're born, but you were in some interesting times and interesting places. Let's talk about you as a fanboy going forward, watching track for the next 40 years and observing the changes. What about the changes in sports, the changes in track and field over those decades that you've remained a fan and an interested observer?
Well, indeed, there has been lots of change. You mentioned Frank Shorter, and Frank Shorter, working with Olin Cassell, he was instrumental in breaking this amateur lock that the AAU had on the United States athletes. At first, they didn't want to hear about it, but then he suggested, wait a minute, these athletes spend a good part of their life training here. He arranged to have the money be put in a trust, and when they stopped competing, they could share it, they could get it. So they could find a way to be paid. They couldn't enjoy it immediately. So that the breakthrough. And then gradually, amateurism recognized based on world dynamics, drugs being used, the violations. I'll go into that in a minute. The world recognized amateurism isn't working. The Soviet Union at the time and the Eastern Bloc countries, they claimed they were amateurs, but they were funded by the state. So they were hardly amateurs. Hell, half the or 2/3 of the Eastern Bloc were women, were men. And when the Olympics introduced chromosome testing in 1968, 2/3 of East German women and Russians never competed again. And then they got into drugs. And then all of a sudden, the American athletes started to realize the hypocrisy, the fighting of the NCAA and the AAU, and they did create the United States Track and Field Federation that sort of resolved that problem. But the hold on to amateur athletics was decaying. And it finally, I guess in the 80s, but I guess in the mid to 80s, the whole amateurism just broke down. It occurred sort of gradually. It wasn't like all of a sudden there's a big dam burst. It was a gradual transition. So amateurism today is the only ones who are amateurs are probably those under the NCAA's control in high school, scholastic. But it was a change. And I think the thing that has changed the most, the training techniques, sports medicine, nutrition, equipment, there's much more known about. We got to build rest into the schedules. When we were being trained, we trained Monday through Friday without any rest. There was one cross-country workout. We ran up to the reservation where we competed or trained, and it was a 3.5 mile up a hill, and then 3.5 mile down. So that was 7 miles added to your training before you even start. And one workout is we ran 3 in and out, 3 5-mile runs. Ran one, we jogged a little bit, rested, ran another one. So we ran 15 miles plus the 7. So that one workout was 22 miles. And not every workout was that strenuous, but they tended to be in the 15-mile range during cross country. So we were overtrained. Today, coaches recognize you got to build some rest period in here. You got to do some upper body training. We never lifted weights. We never did any upper body training or cross training in different sports. It was, you just ran. So training has changed quite a bit. The equipment is much better. The outdoor tracks and the all-weather surfaces are, I think they're like 4 seconds faster per mile. And which is nice to see. Records are made to be broken.
How did you feel when your records fell? Were you able to witness any of your high school or Seton Hall standards and records be surpassed?
Yeah, my half mile went pretty quickly. My twin brother held the mile record at Seton Hall University in 4:03 or something, but they had lost all the records, they being the information sports department. I happened to be reading something, and they had the mile down as 4:10.
Wow.
John Moon was the coach at the time. And I said, John, no, 410 is not the record. My twin brother ran 403 something at Princeton, whatever it was. Oh, gee. But I set up this. When I was captain of the track and field team, I researched all the records and I gave it to the sports information director. And several years later, he lost it.
Oh my gosh.
So anyway, you'd like to be in a better position when you can correct something that's really wrong.
Yeah.
It never
Yeah.
bothered me if they broke it legitimately.
Right. Well, you obviously have lots of fondness for these people that were influential in your early life, career, athletics. How did you stay connected with Seton Hall after you left?
Another good question. I was very grateful for the fact that I got an education. And as I said earlier in my last interview, my parents were not able to afford to send us to college. So this was an opportunity that presented itself. I took advantage of it. I gave back. Now, certainly, I did more than I needed to do to repay my scholarship, but I didn't think of it as a matter of repayment. I thought of it, they were good to me. And when I got into a position where I'm earning some money, I donated well to them. Track and field athletes typically are cheap. They don't donate a lot of money. I don't know why, but it seems to be an issue. So I've always felt that the university was loyal to me at the time. They gave me an education. They even hired me as an instructor. So for the first 12 or 13 years after graduating, I was their employee too. No,
Yeah.
I learned a lot and did well. So I was always loyal. I was a member of the University Advisory Council, President's Advisory Council. So in that role, I had a unique experience. I was a student athlete, I was a teacher, I was an administrator, and I was an alumni. So I could see a lot of the issues that were before the university from those three perspectives. So I've always been active and continue to be.
Did you target your donations? Did that
I-
flow into track and field?
Yeah, I did. When Seton Hall University abolished track and field in 2009 because of Title IX, they needed to create more women's sports. I won't go into all the details there. When I found out all the reasons, they told me, and I was a member of the advisory council, but they didn't ask for my advice. They kept it close to the vest. I understood some of the reasons, but I think there would have been solutions they could have found. There was more at play. So they managed to keep the cross country team, and John Moon was kept on as the cross country coach. So in the last several years, I've been donating some of the allocation of my donation to the cross country team. The basketball gets plenty.
Yeah.
They don't need any more.
Yeah.
They'll spend it if you give it to them, but they don't need it.
You took up skiing. Were you a competitive skier? You've been skiing
Oh,
for
no,
decades.
no. That's another interesting story. I didn't start skiing until my late 20s. My coach never wanted to hear about me getting on the ski slopes. I really didn't get into skiing until 27, 28. It was pretty much towards the tail end of my career. I enjoyed it. I loved it. And I skied for 50 plus years, just downhill, having fun. It was very competitive. My twin brother and my other brothers. I've been all over the world skiing, all over the country, and it's exhilarating. But now that I've turned 80, every turn is a leap of faith. So I try to stay off the black double diamonds.
There's a lot of perhaps parallels that we have. I remember the same thing. Ski club was not an option. As a runner, it was just a leap too far to even consider that would be the potential for career ending. How about your end of your business career? It's another passage that people go to. You can speak from experience on all these things, and it's a pleasure to talk to you. You speak well, you know yourself well. How about that passage or transition out of the business world as an executive?
Okay, so that was another transition. I will preface it by saying I'm retired now 18 years and I'm loving it.
Nice.
Well, my coach, John Gibson's son, goes back many years, 20, 30 years. He had a major heart attack and we were chatting after he recovered nicely. And somehow we got around to how much funds do you really need to retire? And we got chatting about it. He says, you really need to think of it not how much money you need, but what is it that you wish to do when you retire? And same things. Oh, I know what you're talking about. So you need to set goals, and you have to say what's more important to you, your private life, your leisure life, or your work life. I was in IT, as we discussed. IT is a very demanding, challenging career. You get blamed for everything that goes wrong, it doesn't go wrong. It's always the IT guys, right? The computers there. And there's always the project du jour, or the over a lifetime, that sort of stress sort of builds up. I was good at my job and I knew how to eliminate most of the problems, but you reach a point where I've had enough. I started to think about retiring early. And I looked at my financial portfolio. I said, you retire at 62, 61. And I started to do some math analysis. I could retire and maintain my lifestyle completely as it is. So that got me thinking. And then the conversation with my coach's son, he was well in his 60s or 70s, said, yeah, let me start thinking about this a little bit more. So maybe I thought about it for a few years. And then I came to the conclusion, yeah, I can retire next year.
Nice.
And I decided that sounds good. A lot of things I want to do. So my wife dropped me off at the train station. And as I closed the door and said goodbye, I'm thinking of retiring at the end of this year. It was probably the worst thing I could do, to leave her hanging like that. Of course, what do you mean you're going to retire? And then we sat down at a conversation, and I said, well, here's the deal. I said, nothing will change. Our lifestyle is exactly as it is. We've amassed enough wealth, we don't need to fund our kids' retirement. We've given them their education. They can fund their own retirement. So we worked it out and we said, yeah, sounds good. So my wife was a nurse. She continued to work. And so I retired early at 62.
And no effect on your identity.
Well, I would say no, Matt. My colleagues in work, George will be in the workforce in 6 weeks. Just watch.
Yeah.
And I really thought I'd have difficulty. I thought, I'm not going to handle this transition. I'll probably fail at retiring.
Yeah.
And I didn't. Initially, I found a lot of little projects around the house to do, which were always put off. And then we started to travel, do things that we put on hold when there's always something going on. So we started to enjoy our leisure life. So if I wanted to take this trip, I wanted to go out skiing to Colorado, or I wanted to go with my son to Zermatt skiing, I could do it. I'm not saying I retired super wealthy. I retired with enough wealth to maintain my life in the style that I'd become accustomed to. I could have worked another 5, 6, 10 years and amassed more wealth, but for what purpose? To look at a passbook? So I'm enjoying my retirement. Been having for the last 18 years.
George, talking to you from your levels of success from an early age, from your humble beginnings, your humble nature through it all, it's a life well lived.
Thank you.
It is a pleasure to meet you. You're humbly inspiring and you tell good stories. You have such good self-awareness. What do you think about the times you were born into? Was this perfect for you? Do you think you could have thrived 100 years ago or 100 years in the future? You made your way through here, dealing with the challenges, using some of your analytical nature, some of your competitive nature. What do you think about the time you lived through these 80 years?
I don't think much about it. I'll fantasize every now and then. If I had gone back with this knowledge at this period of time, wouldn't that be fantastic? I pretty much, except I have to play with the hand I've been dealt.
Right.
You can't always deal yourself a new hand of cards, right? So things worked out in some areas. I was extremely lucky. Things just worked out the way they did. If my twin brother didn't go out for track and field in his junior year in high school. I don't know if I would have gone out. So hate to give him the credit, but he deserves it. In some cases, it's the luck. The other is basically, this is the life in front of you. This is what I have to deal with, and you deal with it. I don't dwell on what it could have been or should have been. I'll think about it. Yeah, I should have wrote that operating system. One of my other regrets is I never broke a 4-minute mile. And I don't dwell on it, but I said, I ran a 146. I ran a 46.7, 400. I should have easily broke a 4-minute mile, but never had the opportunity because I was focused on 880. But all right, could have been, should have been, but didn't happen. So what?
Yeah. It's interesting to talk to you. You know yourself very well. Listening from the outside, it's very impressive. And some of these things don't seem to impress you as much as I think they can impress some of the rest of us meeting you. The one final thing I want to ask you about is this podcast.
Mhm.
Thank you for your time and contributions to it with this. What do you think would make a good podcast for anyone that who has lived through the 60s and 70s and these decades? What would be a good thing for this podcast to discuss with people? And if you would listen to other episodes, what would you like to hear in this?
That's a tough question. Toughest one you've given me already. I guess number one, the recipient, the one who would listen, has to value what it is they're seeing and what they're observing. So your audience has to be someone who wants to learn, and also something that they can relate to in the sense that they have a shared experience and wants to know a little bit more about what really happened behind the scenes. It's only more recently, Matt, that even though I was in computers, and I really don't spend a lot of time on podcasts, although that's the direction of the future. Not because I don't have the desire or interest in the subject matter. It's just that your time is so limited. There's so much out there. I spend a lot of time not dabbling, but learning from YouTube.
Right.
There's so much content. I guess the real challenge is, how do you get it to the right audience? How does the audience pull it, find it? How do you push it? We could talk about that for the next 2 days. It's an interesting topic. If somebody comes along and finds your podcast on a search, they're going to be interested because they found it, because they're looking for it. Mm-hmm. Now, your challenge is, how do you push it? How do you push this to somebody when your audience is all over the place? Mm-hmm. Now, you probably have a good audience through your running experiences and your hashing experiences. But even among the hash, they are half minds, aren't they?
Yeah. Personally, the reason I do it is I enjoy talking to people. So if nobody else hears this, that's fine with me. But I know your story would be a good part of people's day if they can take the time to listen to it. So I'll be promoting this because I think there's value in it. It's people like you and the time you took, which makes this a really enjoyable couple hours of my life. So I really appreciate it.
Well, let me reciprocate. Just the experience we've had last several days, you're interviewing, you're asking me questions, opening things up in my mind I hadn't really given a lot of thought to. So it's been as inspirational for me as it has been for you, and I thank you. The Mutual Admiration Society, I understand. But and what you're doing is good. And it was Gil Jackson who said, you got to contact this guy. And I'm glad I did. Thank you. It's been very nice. Very good.
All right. We'll leave it there.
I've enjoyed chatting with you. I'd be happy to share any experiences that you want to delve into my brain.
That's a wrap with George Germann. Running in the 70s podcast is available on YouTube, the podcast website, and most podcast platforms. Check the website for links to see a video of George's historic 800-meter run against the Soviets in 1965 and other photos of George and his history. I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.